Samsung's middle child QD-OLED, the S90F, has finally hit our test bench. Unlike the flagship S95F with its polarizing matte screen, the S90F sticks to a traditional glossy finish and comes in both QD-OLED and WOLED flavors, depending on the size you buy. Yes, the dreaded panel lottery is back again this year, but if you land the QD-OLED version, you're still getting a very bright, very colorful set at a lower price than the flagship. Hi, I'm Alex from Ratings.com. Let's see whether the S90F deserves a place in your living room or on the gaming desk when you stack it up against the step-up S95F, LG's glossy G5 OLED, and Samsung's own entry-level S85F. Let's get this out of the way first. The TV comes with both WOLED and QD-OLED panels. In North America, the 55, 65, and 77-inch models are QD-OLED, and all other sizes are WOLED. In Europe, it's a bit more complicated, as most sizes are WOLEDs. Still, each region tends to have at least one QD-OLED model. There's no absolutely perfect way to verify which TV has what panel, but if the fourth last digit of the model code is an E, the TV likely uses a WOLED panel. Our results are only applicable to QD-OLED variants of this TV. We do expect the WOLED models to perform a bit worse overall, especially due to their narrower color range. Alright, with that out of the way, let's tackle brightness. Is this a bright TV? Yes! Yes it is! In filmmaker mode, the 2% highlight tops out at about 1600 nits, and the 10% window lands just above 1400 nits. Those are peak numbers, but the TV is pretty good at sustaining those, although the 10% window does quickly drop to around 1100 nits from its peak. Still, that's very bright, and the TV's performance translates well to real content. Small, specular highlights still pop, even if they don't hit the eye-searing levels we logged on the S95F. Switch to game mode, and you only lose a handful of nits, so gamers aren't punished the way they are when they are using some of the product's competitors. Looking at you, LG C5. Its peaks aren't as high in game mode as in filmmaker, but the bonus of that is that it sustains its numbers a bit better, and longer in game mode. Overall, this TV is very bright no matter what you choose to watch or play. Good stuff. What about black levels? Well, it's an OLED, so they're perfect. You're welcome. On the color side of things, its performance is just what you'd expect of a QD-OLED panel. It displays dark, saturated colors perfectly. Since it's a very bright panel, it also displays bright colors with impact. One thing to note is that there is a slight bug with the color space on this model, something we also saw on the S95F. In the auto color space setting, the measured yellow luminance is too low. The TV's performance there should be more in line with the other colors. Still, even with the bug, the TV excels at displaying bright colors, yellows included. The TV's HDR Pre-Calibration Accuracy is decent, but it has some issues with white balance and color temperature. Blues and reds are overrepresented in brighter grays, and this makes the TV's temperature a bit too cold. Thankfully, the TV's color accuracy is very good, even though there are some mapping errors, which are especially noticeable in grays. The TV's accuracy issues don't impact its PQ EOTF-Tracking, as this TV is almost perfect here. Yes, some shadow details are a bit raised, but aside from that, it's on point. Now, when watching SDR content, real scene brightness averages roughly 450 nits, which is plenty for daytime cable or sports. Looking at some test slides, the 50% window measures in the mid-300s, and a full field white still manages almost 250 nits. Overall, the S90F isn't nearly as bright as the two high-end OLEDs we've reviewed this year in the G5 and S95F, but it's still very bright. Reflection handling is a mixed bag. The glossy finish preserves rich contrast as the TV doesn't smear reflections like it would with a matte coating, but you will still see lamps and windows reflected in darker scenes. Still, the TV does a good job of reducing the impact of that glare, even if you still see it. If you watch a lot of TV in very bright rooms, well, the S90F's blacks do noticeably raise, looking increasingly gray as the room gets brighter. You'll need to juggle your blinds or live with the glare. But hey, at least you've got options. Gotta see the positives. This TV is definitely more accurate in SDR than in HDR. Gamma is extremely close to the 2.2 target, although dark and moderately lit scenes appear slightly brighter than they should, while very bright scenes are instead too dark. We can see that portrayed in the TV's white balance, as all colors are overrepresented in mid-grays. Color temperature is fantastic though, and there are no truly noticeable color errors. Like all other QD-OLED TVs on the market, the TV has an essentially perfect viewing angle. It basically doesn't get any better than this. There's a slight loss of brightness at an extremely wide angle, but it's not noticeable. If viewing angle matters to you, QD-OLEDs are the cream of the crop. Moving on to processing, Samsung's NQ4 AI Gen3 chip is on board, and it cleans up macro blocking almost as well as the S95F, and also last year's Samsung OLEDs. Yeah, the new chip doesn't seem to bring any meaningful improvements here, which means that there's still some visible macro blocking. But like we said, it does clean up some of it, and it does it while preserving most of the detail. There is one spot where the new chip flexes its muscles, and that's its upscaling performance. It's an improvement from last year, making your low resolution content look basically as good as it can, but it still includes a bit of edge enhancement, even when the sharpness slider is set at 0. It's not quite as sharp in filmmaker mode, but it's there. The S90F has exceptional HDR Native Gradient handling. There is no banding in any colors except bright greens, and even then, it's barely noticeable unless you specifically look for it. Now, for the gamers. The S90F supports 4K at 144Hz on all 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, slightly slower than the flagship's 165Hz, but still fast enough for anyone but the most hardcore of PC gamers. Input lag clocks in at roughly 5 milliseconds at 120Hz, 10 milliseconds at 60Hz, and 4.5 milliseconds at 144Hz, so responsiveness is first rate. FreeSync Premium Pro and HDMI 4 VRR are present, but as always, there's no Dolby Vision gaming, so Xbox owners will be sticking to HDR10. On another note, the S90F doesn't come with the slim One Connect box. Cabling goes straight into the chassis. Audio is handled by a 2.1 channel, 40-watt sound system. Fine for casual viewing, but most users will want a soundbar, especially users paying this much for a TV set. This isn't exactly a casual product after all. Like every Samsung set, Dolby Vision is absent and DTS pass-through is still off the table. Dolby Digital Plus pass-through is also limited to 5.1 channels instead of the full 7.1 support. We've seen this on other Samsung models this year, like the S95F and the QN90F. When playing Dolby Digital Plus 7.1 content, the TV just downsamples it to 5.1. Finally, the TV occasionally stutters with 24p content when there's a sudden change in brightness from one scene to the next, as explained by HD TV Test. It's quite hard to notice, but it's there. Time to look at the competition. This is the big one, and likely the duel that will dominate the year. The LG C5 versus the S90F. In past years, Samsung had the edge here, but this year, things are tight. The two TVs are almost equally bright in HDR, with the C5 having an extremely small edge, except in game mode, as it again loses a fair amount of its brightness when gaming. The Samsung loses almost nothing, making it decidedly brighter in its game mode. If you watch a lot of SDR content, the C5 is far brighter than the S90F. In fact, the C5 is bright enough that you're not likely to run it at its max brightness, perhaps even in bright rooms. It's that bright. This would give the C5 the edge in brighter rooms, but the S90F has better reflection handling, especially when dealing with direct sources of light. So advantage S90F? Not quite, as the Samsung's black levels noticeably raise in brighter environments, while the C5, glare and all, stays pretty much pitch black. We told you, it's a tight race. In turn, the S90F is more colorful in SDR, although that's only going to be noticeable in the rare wide SDR color spaces, or if you like to force your TV into a wider space. If you do, then the S90F really flexes its muscles there. And in HDR, there's no contest. Colors pop more on the S90F. Although the C5's image is more accurate in HDR out of the box, the S90F's PQ EOTF-Tracking is a bit more accurate. The C5 has better upscaling and low quality content smoothing, but the S90F has the advantage when it comes to gradients. Of course, the C5 supports Dolby Vision, which is one of its bigger selling points against Samsung. But if you care about having a near perfect viewing angle, then the S90F is a bit better than the C5. I'm sweating because this is just too tight to call. But we'll call it anyway. Right now, the S90F is the better option because the LG C5 still has its HDR10 contouring issue, which is much more noticeable than Samsung's 24p stuttering issue. But even with the contouring issue, we'd say that unless you really want Dolby Vision, the S90F is probably the better sell for most people. But some kudos to LG for closing the gap this year. Conversely, the conversation is simpler when comparing the S90F to the S85F. The S90F is easily better. The S90F is noticeably brighter in HDR and SDR, is a bit more colorful, and supports 144Hz at 4K, while the S85 is limited to 120Hz. Otherwise, the two TVs are basically identical, but unless you don't care about brightness at all or are price conscious, just go with the S90F. Note that both models use WOLED and QD-OLED panels, at least in North America, as the S85F is WOLED only in other regions. In North America, the 55 and 65-inch models of the S85F have QD-OLED panels. Lastly, against the S95F, the situation is reversed. The S95F is better. Surprise! No, not really a surprise. The S95F is noticeably brighter as it sustains 400 nits in HDR, even on a full field white screen. It's very bright. It's also way brighter in SDR, hitting upwards of 700 nits in real scenes. Get your sunglasses out, everyone. Not only is it brighter, but its matte coating gives it far better reflection handling. That thing is like a black hole. Any direct lights just disappear in it. Yeah, it smears glare a little, but it doesn't change the fact that reflections just disappear altogether on that coating. And normally, one of the disadvantages of the matte finish is that it looks a bit washed out in brighter rooms due to the black level rays, but the same thing happens on the S90F this year. So that means the S95F is downright better than the S90F in any room context. Anything else? Oh, right. The S95F also comes with the versatile One Connect box, which lets you manage your cables however you want. And it also supports 165Hz at 4K with very low input lag. Ultimately, the conversation here is simple. The S95F is downright better than the already excellent S90F. The only question here is, are you willing to spend that much? All in all, Samsung's S90F is the sweet spot QD-OLED this year. Bright enough for lively HDR and SDR, colorful enough to shame most WOLEDs, and fast enough for serious gaming. All while keeping those deep, inky blacks that OLEDs are known for. You do give up the anti-glare prowess and extreme peak brightness of the S95F, and you still don't get Dolby Vision, but at its price point, the S90F is a deeply compelling all-rounder, and one of the best TVs of the year. That's our deep dive into the S90F. Do you prefer glossy raised blacks with a bit of glare, or LG's more noticeable reflections, but without any raised blacks? Let us know in the comments, and check the description for our full ratings.com measurements and calibration notes. Until next time, I'm Alex from ratings.com, where we help you find the best products for your needs. Bye!